Hello again. My name is Neil Mitchell. If you need it spelled out, there it is in red. Neil Mitchell for Provo for you. The last video I said something might have offended some people. I said there is no affordable housing in the state of Utah. That's true. And so a lot of people complain about that we need affordable housing. We'll always say define affordable housing. And there's those that say, well, you know, for people that are really hurting, we got to have a big complex with subsidized rent where they don't have to pay much, and we'll house them all right there. It's not affordable housing. That's dumping somebody into a project that's going to create more trouble than you already have. And you look around the country, that's exactly what happens. You wind up with more crime, more drug addiction, more gang problems, etc. So you can say, well, gee, what's the alternative? Well, I can think of a couple. For one, 60 Minutes a few years ago talked to some folks in, I believe it was in St. Louis, and they set up a complex. It was subsidized housing. It was under tight management. If you were a criminal, if you were a drug dealer, if you were a troublemaker, you got kicked out. And this thing was so well run and so desirable, it was right across the street from some of the really upscale homes. I mean, it was in a good part of the neighborhood, a good part of town. And so that's one way. And of course, you've got to have some really tight management. You've got to really stay on top of the problem. The other I've run across is some towns, especially down south and back east. What they've done, instead of having one big complex, they have a whole lot of little fourplexes or duplexes that are spread evenly through town. So they're in all parts of the town. So all these people are not congregated together. They're with neighbors who, they can associate with and hopefully inspire them to move their way up, because I think most people want to just improve themselves. And that, you don't have a lot of young people clustered together where they can, cause problems and form a gang. There are solutions. Most of all, here in the state of Utah, in Utah County, we've got a little problem. The other cities in this county, if they encounter homeless people, they put them in a squad car, drive them to Provo, and drop them off at the Food and Care Coalition. They figure it's Provo's problem. They don't want to mess with it. That is not acceptable. Whoever the mayor is after this election, they've got to get with the other mayors in the county and find a common solution, an overall solution that everybody agrees on. As it is, their attitude is, we'll dump them on Provo. Now, if we were to turn around and take those people and give them all a bus ticket to Los Angeles or Las Vegas, the world would have a fit. We'd probably be on the 6 o'clock news as the scumbags of the country. That wouldn't be a proper solution, and neither is what they're doing now. One person can't solve the problem. One city can't solve the problem. It's got to be a collective effort. And in fact, I'd go so far to say it should be a collective effort of the entire state. You should bring in not only the mayors of Utah County, but state officials too, and work on correcting the problem. Now, there are people that need help, and we should help them. Now, some are a little bit beyond help. I'll give you an example. I had a second cousin named J.W. Knight. I never knew he was my cousin until I got to be an adult and started doing genealogy, and I asked my parents, why didn't you tell me J.W. was my cousin? They said, some people you don't claim kinship with. To give you a little background, as we were kids back in the late 50s, as the school bus was going by Jake's house, I called him Jake. He's called a lot of other things too. I mean, usually it's just JW. As we're going by the house, his grandmother 90% of the time would wave the bus on by. He didn't feel like going to school that day. So when he finally got to the age where he could just quit legally, at first he'd get a job for a while, but his grandmother would say, "Oh, son, that's too hard for you. Oh, you don't do that. That's just too hard." Well, as he got older, he's got next to no education, no job training, and substandard intelligence. Hate to be what's the word, judgmental, but that's what it was. Well, of course, he wound up on welfare. And one day the social worker came. The caseworker asked him, "Mr. Knight, what do you spend your welfare check on?" And he said, "Well, there's groceries and rent." And he was a musician. He had a Fender guitar. And he's strumming along while he's talking to the caseworker. He says, "And I bought a Fender." The caseworker wasn't a musician. He's like, "What in the world would you do with a Fender?" He said, "Mostly I play with it," as he strummed along. The caseworker never figured out what he's talking about. He thought he was talking about a fender of a car. But J.W. did us a favor about 10 years ago. He drank himself to death and died, so we don't have to pay for him anymore. But for every J.W. Knight, there's somebody that is in a world of hurt through no fault of their own. They lost their job, had a medical disaster, and I'm not above helping someone, get back on their feet and move up in the world. And that's the way we should all be. But there's no way in the world I'm going to dump all of anybody that's down and out all together and forget about them and say you've got affordable housing. A better description of that is hell on earth. And if you don't believe me, look what they've done in places like Chicago and New York City. So it's time to move on to something else. I am a person who can listen to others. I can be reasonable, and I can work with others. I've worked with a lot of people. Army, the jobs I had before the Army, and jobs since. It's interesting. In college, I had some very interesting jobs. Since I came out of the South, I went to high school in Tampa, Florida. I'd go back there. I went back there for a couple of summers. I wound up working on an all-black crew. And it was an eye-opener because for the first couple of weeks I felt like an idiot because I couldn't understand much of what was being said. All of a sudden, after a few days, it just kind of clicked. I realized what was being said and I could get along. Man, everything went great. To show you an example, I could say, "Hey Johnny, where's Leroy?" He'd say, "He gone, man." That meant he just left. I could catch him if I hurry. Or I'd say, "Johnny, where's Leroy?" "He been gone, man." That means I had to call him at home because he left a long time ago. And there were a couple other variations. But once you get to know people, you get to converse with them, you can fit right in. It's no problem. I mean, all humans are basically alike. Believe it or not, they are. And another job I had after I graduated from college in 1969 had a draft board breathing down my neck. They were out to get me, and I wanted to get married first. My fiancée wanted to get married too. She didn't want me being hauled off before the wedding. And so I went down to see the Army recruiter, and I signed up under the 120-day delay program. That meant I was in the Army now, but I wouldn't go on active duty for 120 days. So I needed a job. But back then, everybody wanted you to be a member of a reserve component or the National Guard because they weren't being, back then, they weren't being nationalized or weren't being activated. They knew you'd be on the job. That was the joke. That's where all the draft dodgers went. Well, my draft status was the same as theirs. So when I'd sign up, apply for a job, they'd say, "Oh, Mitchell, what reserve component you with?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm not. I'm in the Army. I'm just not going on active duty for 120 days. I said, "Well, come back when you get out of the Army. We're not going to train you for 1 or 2 months. So I couldn't get a job. Well, what it did, at that time, the city of Orem to our north was almost all apple orchards, peach orchards, cherry orchards. I went up there, and for a month I picked fruit. You know, you got paid by the pound. So many, basically you pick it this way and you get paid. Well, I was the only English speaker on the crew, and that was 1969. And I learned, I tell you, those people that are agriculture workers, they work hard for their money, and I respect them, because I did that for a month. And what's irritating, here I was an college graduate, and I was, trying to live, pay my living expenses. I was picking fruit, and a lot of kids today, if I can't have a managerial position, I forget it. That really sticks in my craw. Here lately, I've heard good words about a lot of young people getting out there and working, and I think my hat's off to them. That's the way it needs to be. Now, as in my case, about a month after this started, I learned that there was a Jensen drilling company in Mapleton, Utah, that was hiring people, and they weren't asking questions because everybody would be laid off in December. So I was able to work from there until I actually went into the service, full on active duty. I had a job. I was able to pay the bills. But there are people who refuse to work, and I don't have much sympathy for them. They've got, I don't know what the answer is, but just paying the way for them is not the way. And if you know how to handle those people, you're way ahead of me. Let's just move on. Like I say, I can work with anybody. I have worked with all sorts of people. I'm reasonable, and above all, I believe in working with others to find solutions. That's the way it should be. And so, I am Neil Mitchell, candidate for mayor for Provo for you. Until I tape another one of these sessions, you have a great day. Have a pleasant day. Thank you for listening.